So as we move into the second part of our test-taking strategies module, we're going to ask ourselves, what should we be doing the night before a test? When should we be studying? Now, cramming is a very common practice. Right? You stay up late, you try to cram that information into your brain by just reading and rereading and doing and jamming it in. This allows for rote memory. It's not good in the long term. There is something called Bloom's Taxonomy. It's very well known to teachers. There are really 6 levels of understanding. At the lowest level, there's just straight remembering. So these are questions that appeal to this lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy. Use words like define, duplicate, list, memorize, repeat, state. These kinds of questions, well, yeah, cramming can be effective. The second level is actually understanding, not just regurgitating the definitions, but showing that you know what the definitions mean. So this is where you use words like classify, describe, discuss, explain, identify, locate, recognize, report, select, and translate. And yeah, this is from Vanderbilt University Center for Teaching, citations right here. Once you understand, well, then you can apply. This is where you're going to have verbs like execute, implement, solve, use, demonstrate, interpret, operate, schedule, sketch. Now, cramming is no longer useful when you reach the application stage. So there are 6 levels. Cramming is useful on level 1 and level 2. It is not useful on levels 3 through 6. Analyzing is the next step. So this is differentiate, not in the calculus sense, but in the, there are 2 different people who've come up with proposed solutions for this. Help us pick one. So you have to differentiate between the 2, compare them, contrast them, relate them, examine, experiment, question. So this is where you're saying, yeah, you can't just turn the crank and get it out. You understand how the crank works, and you could build that crank if you need to. Pushing it further is evaluating. So this is appraise, argue, defend, judge, select. The last step is creating. So writing your own question of that type, challenging yourself that way. When you are studying, you need to try and move through all 6 of these levels of Bloom's taxonomy for any given skill. This should be your long-term goal. Cramming the night before will get you about this high. It doesn't get you to mastery learning. It doesn't get you to long-term retention. The number of students who cram stand out in a crowd because when we're reviewing content, they will say, we have never done this before. I have had students tell me they've never done something 2 weeks after I tested them on it. That is a sheer, blatant sign that some of them are cramming. Other students remembered it quite well and could still reproduce it. Others didn't remember because they never learned it. They were just trying to copy off others, but that's another story. So this should be your goal. And you can't cram all this in one night. You need to pace it out. You need to push yourself to understand. So, for example, in math class, often you'll stop at solving. Analyzing is where you go past the straight calculations and you start having to solve word problems. This 4th level is the last level that can be really effectively taught and evaluated with machine-scored questions. This is where multiple choice, numeric response, and that style end. With evaluate and create, that's where written response begins. So these are not as common as they should be in the maths and sciences. Science, it frequently shows up in the lab. You have to analyze your data, evaluate the results. You can even come up with suggestions for improvements to the lab That's in the creation portion. But you need to try and push yourself through these, and that takes time. So the first 3 stages are not terribly dissimilar. They're not uncommon. The next 2 stages get a little bit tougher, and it's the creation that is the toughest stage. But if your teachers are not giving you the questions that push you up to these highest levels, maybe you should try to push yourself. Maybe you should take a look at these lists of verbs. You can do a Google search for Bloom's Taxonomy or Bloom's Taxonomy verbs. You'll notice is one of the autocompletes. And it'll help you put together what kind of questions there are, and you can evaluate for yourself how well do I truly understand this? How deeply can I delve into this? So this is something I strongly recommend as a student you get familiar with, because as you start to recognize these verbs, you could start to tell yourself, oh, I've been asked to defend or argue a position in an essay. This is the level I need to work on. It's evaluation. Right? Or you need to produce original work with terms like design, assemble, construct. In science, it's not uncommon to say, design a lab, and work with it that way. So these kind of questions are not that unusual. You need to recognize them all and push through. And if your goal is to cram, you are probably going to get stuck in these first 3 levels. You might be able to answer some of the analyze questions if you cram your head full of examples of very similar questions. But that's not the same as truly analyzing. You need to be able to push yourself to these higher levels. That cannot be done the night before. Now, the nice thing about mastery learning versus cramming is retention. If you just cram it in, right, well then what happens? A few weeks go by, and it's gone. So you're sitting there 2 to 3 weeks between your chapter test and your midterm, and you have to cram it all in over again, because if you're just cramming it in, it's falling out in between. But if you've truly mastered it, and you understand how to create these problems at the highest level, what it takes to put a problem together, and I mean truly create, I don't mean take a textbook problem and then replace a 12 with a 13. I mean write your own situation from scratch that truly does it. If you can do that, then you've really got a handle on it. And that puts your retention through the roof. And that means when midterms come around, it's not a big deal. You just need to go back and review the things that you were a little weak on the first time, because the skills you've mastered will still be in that head of yours. And you're going to be ready to go. This should always be your goal.